I'm well. Welcome to day 3 of Writers Week. The first thing that I would like you to do is I would like you to turn to that very good-looking person at the end of your row who is your teacher, and I want you to say, "Hey, thanks for bringing me to Writers Week today." Can you do that? One of the most important thank yous. Some other thank yous. Thank you to the FHS boosters. I know a lot of your parents are boosters. Without their support, this week would not be possible. Thank you to Tech Crew, who has been working hard for us all week and will be working hard the rest of the week. So thanks for that. And thank you to you for being such a wonderful audience. I can assuredly say that Writers Week 25 would not exist if not for the fantastic students here at Fremd High School. So I can't thank you guys enough. So the speaker you're going to be seeing today is a music critic and author of the first collection of criticism by a living female rock critic. Her newest release is a memoir called Night Moves. She was formerly an editorial director at MTV News, and an editor at Pitchfork and Rookie Magazine. Her essays have appeared in Best Music Writing for 2004, 2005, 2007, 2010, 2011. Her book, The Girl's Guide to Rocking, was named one of 2009's notable books for young readers by the American Library Association. Please put your hands together and help me in welcoming Jessica Hopper.
Good morning. Thank you for that introduction. Thank you for having me. I think maybe I'll start with doing a little reading, and then I'm gonna talk about being a writer, and then I'm gonna show you a documentary that's very short. Let's see. So I have a couple books out. Sure. Oh, I see now. So this book came out in 2015. It's an anthology of my music criticism from the last 15 years. I started working professionally as a music writer when I was about, I guess you guys are the same age, as 16, when I first started writing about music in the local paper where I grew up in Minneapolis. And anyways, I'm just gonna start reading and then I'll talk about the reading. How about that? The book that I had that came out late last year is called Night Moves, and it's a collection of sort of diaristic writing from 2004 to 2008, which is, even though I started writing as a teenager, I didn't start working full-time as a writer. And really having that be my career until I was 28. And this is sort of at that period of time, and it's really about being a broke writer, living in Chicago, being obsessed with music, and riding bikes with my friends to bad parties. That's basically the gist of it. Hold on. This is called American City, I Love You Too. It's about riding my bike down Damon Avenue. I don't know if anyone has ever been to the city of Chicago, but I lived on Damon Avenue, which is one of the, it's a street that goes through the entire city since it's a grid city, so you can ride down it and basically see the whole thing, see the whole city. Since enacting my Lenten pact to only drive for work-related errands, I'm experiencing Chicago's deep, mantic powers on the daily. This is not to say I did not love this hobbled city, potholed and blue-collared, from the moment I arrived 6 years and 3 days ago, but just that having to bike, sometimes too far, to new and inconvenient places, and often down the same old route down Damon, I might as well be seeing it for the first time. All the apartments illuminated with the blue glow of a TV, the living room walls gridlocked by mounted collector's plates, scrubbed clean dudes in light rinsed jeans drinking beer from a can on a leather couch, now viewed so easily due to the 2-story basement to ceiling windows in the front of their new construction condos. The patinaed crosses and gilded domes of all the bright Ukrainian churches. It's just the stuff you miss when you're in the car with B96 up too loud. On Saturday, Al and Nora, the chain-smoking young sweetness that he hangs with, and I all biked 14.4 miles to the psychedelic art show at Texas Ballroom in Pilsen. On the way, Nora and I chattered in the bike lane about girl stuff. On the way back, she lollygagged behind, and I took off ahead, seeing just how fast I could go on a friend's fancy track bike. I was reenacting scenes from Breaking Away on the barren byways in the heart of Cook County at 2 a.m. on a spring Sunday. Taking Damon from one side of town to another, you get a good span of Chicago, something practical to counter the highlights reel of Lakeshore Drive. Damon is all that is old, burnished, and lopsided. It is profoundly comforting to live in a city that doesn't give a bleep and loves you how you are, because it is every bit as marred, bereft, and cocky as you are. We came through Pilsen strip malls, past the 24/7 donut diner, over the freeway overpass where all the trucks exit from mills and factories, through Latino revitalization and School of the Art Institute students tangling it up on 18th, through 9 straight blocks of taquerias and storefront churches, past bondoed cutlasses springing tinny oompa oompa bandas, and then through 5 blocks of the tunnel underneath the land bridge that is strangely clean because it's so vast and sketchy that no one walks under it, not even to tag it, which empties out into broken cement parking lots and sprawling brick warehouses that once served industries that no longer exist, past public housing bungalows isolated from their now demolished twin, the Ida B. Wells homes in Bronzeville, past Little Italy's ass end through the hospital campus with its wide presidential appellative streets of Roosevelt and Washington, its Spartan gutters emptying into direct arterials to downtown, over the bridge that spans I-290, through a near West Side neighborhood holding out against gentrification, past the parking lots of the United Center, trashed after the Bulls versus Golden State Warriors game hours earlier, past the long swath of empty lots and boarded up CHA low-rises, tiny mountains of debris and weedy knolls on either side of the Green Line train elevated tracks, the parts of West Madison Street that have never been rebuilt since being burned in the riots, then underneath the tracks where the best car chase in the Blues Brothers movie takes place, past 2 women singing a Mary J. Blige song together on the corner, past a gaggle of hipster friends in funny outfits, waving and hugging while exiting a square dance at open end, past the Drag City office, underneath my favorite train bridge, then 3 more blocks where I hung a right on Ohio and rode no-handed the last 2 blocks to my little house. Thanks. Like I said, I started writing as a youth, as a teenager. When I was about 15 years old, I got into punk rock. And before that, I had never really been into music other than what I heard on the radio. I didn't think of myself as a writer. I didn't have any particular interest in writing. I read all the time, but before these things sort of came together, I was just a kid that had felt like a weirdo my whole life, and I was always sort of looking for a thing that I didn't know I was looking for, and I found that in music and in right then in punk rock, and I was, when I heard music that was suddenly meaningful to me, it was like my whole universe kind of was put into order. I was like, oh, this is the thing I'm looking for. And even if that thing that I was looking for is basically like women screaming with guitars and like kind of loud, angry music. And I became obsessed by it with this music. And was going to shows all the time in Minneapolis, where I grew up, and I was particularly obsessed with an all-female band called Babes in Toyland, and they were very significant to me. I really consider myself like the #1 fan. And there was, at this time, this is like around 1991, so forever ago, where I was growing up in Minneapolis, there was a lot of independent publications about music. This is pre-internet, so you know, it was fanzines, which were like self-published magazines that people might make copies of and distribute or sell. And there was a lot of different ways to read about local music. There was a lot of different little publications. And I would obsessively read these now that I was like super into music and I had my purpose. And I really didn't like the way that the music critics in Minneapolis wrote about Babes in Toyland, this band that I was obsessed with. And they made them, they really sort of didn't understand what was great about them, and sort of maligned them for being like too loud or too this or too that. And so I took it upon myself to call some of these publications, and I would say, listen, I want to write like a rebuttal to what you wrote about this band that I love, because you totally don't understand them. And you know, if this was happening today, it would probably just be like some comment section somewhere, or you know, me posting some extra comment on somebody's Instagram. But back then, I actually had to call people and say, I want to write about this band because you don't understand them, and you don't understand what matters about them, and you don't understand what matters to like a young female audience when they're watching this band. And people would say, well, have you ever written before? And I was like, yes, in school. I do my homework all the time. Like, of course I know how to write. And they were like, have you written professionally? I was like, no, but I can figure it out. And they'd be like, how old are you? And I was like, I'm 15. And none of the people took me up on my offer to write about this band. So I decided I will take it upon myself to correct these people. And so I started a little magazine that was called Hit It or Quit It. And I would make it at Kinko's. I Xeroxed it. I made it with my friends. Some of my friends drew comics. Some of my friends interviewed bands. I interviewed bands. I reviewed records that I liked. I wrote about my life. All of these things, and it became like a little 40-page magazine. And I put it out a few times a year, and I sold it at the record store where I had a job. And also, then other people started to notice it, and all of these local magazines and stuff that were like, no, you can't write about Babes in Toyland. After I did my first issue of my own magazine, they were like, yes, of course you can write about Babes in Toyland. So I started writing professionally, and you know, that meant like getting like $35 checks for reviewing a record and feeling like I had basically, you know, was famous. It was a very exciting thing to have my opinion published in the newspaper. I had no particular expertise. I was just writing about things that I loved deeply, or sometimes I was reviewing records I hated and had very caustic opinions about. But the idea that within music and the music scene that I was in, the idea that a teenage girl was an authority on anything, or that a teenage girl's fandom was something to be taken seriously and like a sign of their authority, was basically unheard of. And so there was definitely like a lot of people, once I first started publishing and writing, who were like grown adult men who basically were mocking me to my face. And it was like weird and sad and funny. To me, I couldn't understand like, why wouldn't these people want, like, what, you know, to be part of their scene? Why would this be threatening? I didn't really fully realize for a long time that, not a long time, but like maybe a couple years, that the world of music criticism is almost exclusively like middle-aged white guys. And there was very few women, but in the town where I lived, in Minneapolis, there happened to actually be quite a few women music writers, including like the pop critic at the paper. And so I just assumed, pre-internet, I only really knew what was happening in my city. I thought every city had a bunch of female rock critics in it. I didn't realize that it was like kind of an anomaly where I lived. Anyway, so I started writing and publishing this magazine, with regularity and writing for other magazines, and the little magazine started to sort of like go around the world and be mail ordered, and I would send it to countries all over the world, and I had pen pals all over the world, and for me it wasn't so much about like the act of writing. I mean, I really loved writing. I really loved thinking about music. I really loved writing down my thoughts and feelings about the things that I cared about deeply, and the way that it put me in conversation with other people within music culture and music community worldwide. Like, that was exciting, but it was kind of less about writing and more about like talking with people about things that we cared about. And so that, to me, really, it kind of gave me like it gave me a real sense of purpose, especially once I realized that there weren't really teenage girls doing what I was doing, and it started to feel almost like that much more important to kind of be in that space and hold that space and say, like, my fandom's important. Like, you can't discount this, you can't malign this, so I kept doing that through high school, and I didn't go to college. I fell asleep during my ACTs. Don't do that. It's like not a good course of action. I was at a Nirvana concert very late the night before, and just didn't work out as planned. But I didn't go to college in part because I felt like I knew what I wanted to do, and I was working with music, and as a teenager, I started, like, after I graduated from high school, I was like 18, 19, I started writing for national magazines. None of them really exist any longer, otherwise I would name them, but also including, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of the Beastie Boys. They had a magazine. I wrote for that magazine too. But I started writing about music, and I started working with music, and I had like a PR company where I promoted bands and record labels and independent music that sort of aligned with the things that were important to me. I never, other than working at record stores, I never had like a job, because I wanted to work with the things that I believed in. I kind of felt like constitutionally incapable of, I don't want to say having a real job, but like I just wanted to, I'd already sort of plowed into the world doing what I wanted to do. The idea that I would go to college to learn how to do what I was already doing, or something that would take me away from what I was truly passionate about, seemed really strange to me. I don't necessarily think that's like a good idea now. I'm not just saying that because you guys are like poised for college age. The world is a different place. But I had a business, but I kept doing my magazine. I kept writing for other magazines, and by the time I was like in my mid-20s, I was really, I'd moved to Chicago, and I'd really found like an incredible community of people who cared about music and had similar sort of ideas towards independence as I did. I found like a real cool group of people that I was always like either making music with or debating music with. And towards the end of my 20s, I realized I didn't want to put all this energy into promoting other people's bands and record labels and their big ideas, that I wanted to take that energy and put it into my own big ideas. And so I decided I was going to quit doing PR for bands and record labels, and that I was going to basically invest in myself and jump off into writing full-time. And fortunately, I lived in a totally disgusting, decrepit apartment that cost virtually nothing, so I hardly had to earn a living, which is good because working full-time as a freelance writer then and now is sometimes like very, very scrappy work. But I jumped off into this, and I started writing primarily for the Chicago Reader, which is the local to Chicago alternative weekly. Right now it is the longest running alternative weekly in the country, and also it is a publication you should be reading. It was sort of just recently saved from a lot of bankruptcy and turmoil and stuff like that by a consortium of 4 women who came from all different backgrounds to basically put this publication back together to serve the city of Chicago. And it's really one of the only publications in the country that is being run by women from all different backgrounds, and it's becoming a really amazing paper. Anyway, so I started writing for the Chicago Reader. I worked for a public radio show called This American Life, where I picked out the music. I DJ'd really terrible parties for about $50 a pop. I was on a roller skating team that performed at nightclubs in weird outfits, but we would get paid like $50 a piece to go roller skate at like kind of gross mainstream dance clubs downtown. You know, it's a living, but so this is sort of like what's happening in this book. But anyway, so I did a lot of different things to kind of have the freedom and space in my life that it took to become a writer. And once I jumped off into the world of being a freelance writer, and I just wrote about music, I just reviewed shows, I just interviewed bands, I wrote essays, critical essays, saying like, this is how I examine this music. It came from a distinctly feminist point of view, which was kind of a little unusual in the world that I worked in, but there definitely was like, I did have like a lineage. There have always been feminist music critics. And so I got my start, and I was in this world, and it really, I did whatever I could so that I had the space to really dedicate myself to my writing and invest in my own voice and my own art, and also spend like a ton of time reading, in part because I didn't go to college, and so it was a lot of self-education. I read hours and hours a day. I basically put myself into like, this is my college. I was reading bell hooks and music history and all sorts of things. I've already been talking for 20 minutes. How is that possible? And I wrote my first book, which is called The Girl's Guide to Rocking. It is a book, I wrote the book that I wished I had when I was 16. It's a guide on playing music, starting a band, everything you need to know about that. When I was 16 and starting to play in bands, I was really isolated in that. I didn't really know any other girls that played instruments. I think it's very different now. But I didn't really have anybody I could ask for help and not be like ridiculed for not knowing things. So I wrote this instructional book that was for tweens and teenagers. And after that, my career started to sort of pick up. I wrote for national magazines, Rolling Stone, GQ, Spin. I had a column in the Chicago Tribune where I covered local music for 6 years. Wrote for the Chicago Reader every week. And then a few years ago, this book came out that collected a bunch of my work. It is entitled, I don't know if you can see, The First Collection of Criticism by a Living Female Rock Critic. That title pretty much holds true. It was very important for me to give the book a meaningful title because I had wanted to put out this book for several years, and people within publishing said there's no precedent for this, and I was like, but Rob Sheffield and Chuck Klosterman and all of these very famous and celebrated men, they have collections of their criticism that are like New York Times bestsellers. Why wouldn't I be able to have something like that? And they're like, well, there's no precedent, women haven't done it. And so in order to have a book exist in publishing, something has to go first, basically. And I was so tired of people telling me that the women I looked up to, that their work didn't count and didn't exist. I had to make something that was essentially like planting a flag in the ground and going, okay, it exists now, so that everybody who was coming behind me couldn't be told that there was no way for their work to exist or be published. The book did, it sounds like someone's listening to John Mayer in the other room. Okay. What am I saying? The book did really well. I went to 4 continents, 7 countries outside of America. The book sold ridiculously well. So after people telling me for many years that this couldn't exist and it wasn't worth publishing, you know, I felt vindicated. And because of that, then I started getting job offers. I'd been freelance for 20 years. I was senior editor at Pitchfork. I was editor-in-chief of a short-lived print magazine called the Pitchfork Review. From there, I went and became the editorial director of MTV News, which had sort of rebooted. I know people are probably like, oh, MTV, there is news, there is journalism there. For a short period of time, yes, there was. And we made award-winning journalism with a very diverse staff during an election year. What's I gonna say? And then I put out this memoir. Right now I'm working on my 4th book. In the meantime, when I was at MTV, I learned how to produce documentaries, and since then I've been producing short form documentary music film, both first at MTV and then later I produced about 150 short form pieces that lived on Spotify. Most people don't know there's video on Spotify. It is in your playlist. You probably don't even notice. And podcasts. And what I'm working on right now is I'm working on my 4th book, which is it is a feminist music history of the 1970s. And I also am producing and hosting a podcast for public radio called Lost Notes, which is a long form music history podcast of sort of parts of music history that haven't really been covered. It will be the first podcast hosted by a woman about music that's like happening, which seems really strange, right? Like we should have produced music podcasts hosted by women, but we don't. So that comes out this year. That is what I do. That is what I'm working on. I feel like maybe I just read my resume. I have a few minutes, and I wanted to show part of a documentary that I made, that I produced when I was at MTV. In part because a lot of times we just think of music journalism or journalism as something that is written, but there's a lot of ways to take skills and expertise and translate them into other ways of telling stories. So, you guys are familiar with Chance the Rapper and Kanye West, right? Okay. So when I was at it, I don't see a thing. It'll go. When I was at MTV News, we launched a documentary series, and the people who are the heads of MTV were like, we want a Chance thing, we want a Kanye thing, and we're like, neither of them will talk to us or do any press or like do something that they don't control. And we wound up doing a story on Kirk Franklin, who appears on both of their records, and who turned out to be a lot more interesting than I think Chance and Kanye turned out to be in a weird way. This is also one of the only things I've made that I can show you because it doesn't have anyone smoking weed, going to a strip club, or swearing a ton in it. So, and I can show you part of it and probably not all of it. But if you want to know about more of these things, you can go to my website, which is jessicahopper.org. And there's also a Prince documentary I made up there.
No. What a drama music like that. If I'm having to touch somebody today who's maybe hurting and going through something difficult, I'm not the dopest singer, and it's a lot I'm still learning. Thank you for all these talented and gifted people that you allow me to work with today. God just gave me this.
Come on, little internet. You can do it. I could just synopsize the whole thing.
Hey, Daryl, would you choose a network rated number one?
Would y'all be cool if open up with prayer? Father, help me to touch somebody today who's maybe hurting and going through something difficult. I'm not the dopest singer, and it's a lot I'm still learning. Thank you for all these talented and gifted people that you allow me to work with today. God just gave me this incredible gift of songwriting. Give me the right dope words to say, to show them how loving and how incredible you are. Make some noise for in your name, Christ, I pray. Amen. Let's get it.
B1 Mark interview, take one.
Church and being raised in hip-hop, for me, became something that was very natural for the two to come together. 5, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Some of the comments that I've had about who I work with, that's kind of been the narrative of my career. In the 90s, it was with Salt.
Oh my gosh, okay.
There's a petition going around to have John removed from the church.
What? I thought you knew. It's been circulating for like 2 weeks now.
Sunday was the final straw.
And, you know, with R. Kelly and Bono and Mary J. And, you know, that's kind of been a constant in my life. I got a lot of criticism from a lot of Christians for working with Kanye. And a lot of people, you know, question my integrity, question my spirituality, you know, question my Christianity. It challenged me, you know, it's very painful. Some people responded, like I was on there, you know, twerking and, you know, cussing and, you know, just turn it up. But I'm doing me.
If we humble ourselves, fall on our face,
even Kanye. Within that song of saying that, who's to say that someone is so far that God's love can't grab them where they are, you know, but we don't go get them because we don't want to leave the rules on the porch of the church, and so we don't go.
Listen, I'm so honored to be here. Yo, man, there's a lot of people hurting in the world, a lot of people going through all kind of craziness, but if you're glad to be alive, make some noise. Let's go. Uh-oh.
I did Pitchfork last year with Chance, and we just kind of built a relationship from there. When I first heard that Chester Rapper was somebody who even knew my music and knew who I was, I mean, he knew more about my music than I did, and talked about my influence on him and how he used to listen to my music when he was young and in church, and how even my music influences his music now.
It's an honor in Chicago. Make some noise for Kirk Franklin out here!
But you know, it's very humbling to stand in front of over 20,000, you know, young white hipsters and come out there and do a set with him, and you know, a lot of kids knew my song.
There's still more, but I think we're
You're at 5 minutes.
should we do Q&A?
Yep.
So that's something else. We have like 6.5 minutes for Q&A. Does anyone have any questions? Comments more than questions? Absolutely no questions. You in the green. All sorts of music. I mean, the thing that I am probably best known for doing is about 5-6 years ago, I did a piece with a guy named Jim DeRogatis about R. Kelly that basically put that conversation back into motion, and we kind of see where that wound up recently. I write about all kinds of music. I did the first cover story on Kendrick Lamar. I've written extensively about hip-hop. I just read about country music for something last week. I read about all sorts of stuff. Today on the Village Voice, I wrote the first essay written by a woman since 1971 about this year in pop music for the Village Voice Critics Year-End Poll, which is like the most prestigious thing that happens in my field. And I wrote about Casey Musgraves and Janelle Monáe. So, read about all sorts of stuff. And?
Did you ever get noticed by the band that you're the #1 fan for?
Yeah, I am actually in a book about them, and am still to this day friends with some of them, and though their band has broken up, they are a little bit better known now through my fandom. We're sort of aligned with each other. And
What's your favorite hip-hop album?
I mean, I don't know, it shifts. Right now, I really, well, you're going to see her soon, Jamila Woods. I really liked her last record a lot, but right now I really like No Name's Room 25, which just came out a few weeks ago, which is local. And that's my current fave, you know. All-timer, I mean, you know, that's tough, but The Roots, Things Fall Apart. There's a hand somewhere else. Hand.
After so many years of writing, do you find it difficult to keep that creative process going throughout the years?
No, I mean, it changes. It really changes. How I wrote when I was 16 years old is very different than it is today, when it is the thing that I do to support a family of 4 other people. And, you know, writing books is very, very different than just writing like album reviews. You know, it's a difference between writing 200 words and 75, 85, 100,000 words. And I also edit books too, and so music has never stopped being, for me, like a really exciting part of like a cultural conversation to be part of. But it really does take, like, when you're writing a lot, you also have to put a lot in. So I have to read a lot, I have to listen to a ton of music, I have to stay connected to things that are exciting to me within that world and ideas that are exciting to me. I'm a lot more disciplined about it now at 42 than I was at 20 or 22 for sure. No, I don't. I like if I don't have. I only watch stuff like the Grammys and Super Bowl if, like literally, if I'm getting paid to. I think Maroon 5 is patently terrible. Last question, Army sweatshirt there. Is that you? Oh, you were just moving your hand. Okay. Any thoughts, questions? Last question. Way back there. Under the light, you. Right there, that one. Who's my favorite artist? And I mean, like, that's like super impossible for me. Right now, some of my favorite artists are in a book that I'm working on, including Joni Mitchell and LaBelle. And sometimes when you dive really, really deeply into someone who's your favorite artist, you become like annoyed and sick of them. And so it's kind of a funny thing. Also right now I'm like very obsessed with Nina Simone. I have a lot of different favorite artists in different ways. Thank you for having me. Goodbye. Have a fun day at school, kids.